when does it make sense to run display ads in your eyes? And, we'll go through that first, and then we'll try to get a little tactical so people have some ideas to steal.
I think it makes sense if you really want to do one-to-one targeting or one-to-few in terms of getting in front of certain key accounts. I think it also makes sense as well if you have identified placements that your ICP will hang out, and you can target those placements as a targeted whitelist, and those are high value websites that you want to get in front of. I think that's when it makes sense. Really the intention behind it, right? Like you really want to get in front of these groups of individuals that's really going to make a difference. That's where I think it can make sense. I also love display in terms of helping support an outbound motion, right? So you're doing one-to-one or you're doing one-to-few, you're doing that with social, but then you're also covering those accounts as well with display. And you're really creating that omnipresence, right? Where you're reaching people wherever they go because you're trying to get in front of that audience that's really high value to you.
I'm a horrible online shopper in that I have a problem, and I like the stores that I buy from absolutely love me and get me every time on display ads when they just surround me everywhere.
They're just like little touch points,
I know, I
It's
know.
there, You don't think much of it. You're most likely not going to click through, right? A good CTR on display is like 0.5% to give context.
Mhm.
So it's just having that, I think a fancy word here is that propinquity, where, you are showing up with those multiple touch points everywhere.
I think I have to Google that because my little brain has no idea what that word means. Sweet. So you mentioned metrics. One of the things that I struggled with in the past was trying to show the right metrics for performance, because many marketing leaders just write off display of, hey, we're not doing it in general. Then there's the other half who just accepts that this is something that we have to do. And then for the people that say it's something that we have to do, they still need to show performance at the end of the day. So how would you show performance when you're running display ads?
It's loose. It's going to come down to influence. That's really it. So influence opportunities. Being able to measure impressions by accounts is very important as well. So that's another way you can justify it, where if you can filter by a specific list of accounts, and then you can see by account how many exposures have they reached in terms of impressions, did any of them click through, and measuring that account journey, I think is the best way to prove value in terms of display spend, because then at least you can go to your decision maker, you're gonna say, hey, these high value accounts that we're trying to break into, they had 50 impressions from display, and oh hey, guess what, a couple of them actually click through or something like that. I think that's really where the most value makes sense from display.
So to play it back to you, I feel like where people might go wrong is maybe they don't have that conversation up front with whoever they're reporting into on performance, of just setting expectations and, hey, we're going to run display ads, but this is how we're going to show performance. Because if you skip that, then they're like, hey, where are the conversions? How much pipeline was created and all this stuff? And it was like, that was never the goal to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. And on that note too, like when it comes to driving conversions with display, you can do this. You can do this for B2B. And I used to do this when I was in the B2C world as well. But the way people do it is pretty inaccurate. So where display conversions can happen is when you're going after specific inventory that your ICP hangs out on, right? It's marketing 101. Where are my people hanging out on, and how can I get my message in front of them? If you've identified a couple of publications that your ICP frequents very often, and you can put your ad on those publications, that's where you have the potential to drive an actual conversion. Of course, in relation to social and search, it's going to be much lower, but that's where it's possible when you're getting more and more granular. The other possibility as well is through retargeting. You can do target CPA campaigns with the retargeting and retargeting individuals via display, and you can also drive conversions that way. But by and large, display is an awareness channel, and to your point, you have to like communicate with your decision makers that we're not going to spend $5,000 on display and it's going to drive 100 new opportunities or whatever, right?
If we're being honest, I know that the first time that I ran display, I was using metrics like that, and shocker, it didn't happen. So if you take one, hopefully you take many things away from this episode. Do not do that. So let's talk about creative. And let's say, we're going to run display ads in 2022. Knowing that it's more so an awareness tactic, what do you see or recommend for good display creative?
personal, like personalized creative is the best. So ideally HTML5 is better than static, and ideally even more so than that if you can do dynamic content optimization where your creative will dynamically be personalized based on the first party data that it matches with. So for example, if I'm getting in front of Microsoft, it'll say like, hey, Microsoft, etc. And if you don't have that capability, even just breaking it out, campaign by audience segment so that you can create that personalization is super powerful. I think that's what's going to stand out, right? Most of us have banner blindness. So the more personal we can be to the person we're trying to show our message to, same on social, right? If we're going after a specific persona, they have different pain points and we can speak to their pains, that's going to resonate. So the more personalized you can make your creative, the better.
And then from a content perspective, it's awareness. So are you even driving people to, ungated content, or are you really trying to just drive people to, let's say, high priority pages on your site, whether it's the home page, the platform page, whatever it may be?
Yeah, if it's display, it's usually going to be driving people to the homepage. What I've seen work well in B2C, that'd be interesting to see in B2B, I haven't seen many people do this, is advertorials. They're basically like these articles that are actually like trying to pitch your product, but it helps and educates people. And like that would work really well in B2C. It would be interesting to see if people do that in B2B. But for the most part, by and large, for B2B advertisers, it's driving people to their homepage or it's driving people to like a resource center. Where I think driving content makes sense as well is you can do it through display, but also through native ads, as that's like more contextual to the placement and driving people to articles as well. I would not use display for conversion by and large if it's prospecting. If it's retargeting, there's a play for it, but ideally you're leading with value.
So let's get into retargeting then, because when I've used display tools before, I would say I burned some money just running general display, but then retargeting, was a little bit better. So, for people that are all in on retargeting, let's give them some of the Silvio Gold and any recommendations that you have.
Yeah, when it comes to retargeting, if you can, ideally, if you have enough traffic to support it, if you can retarget people based on certain pages they visited, that's really powerful. Also, if you can do a layered retargeting where you do all web visitors, but then you can layer in profile data of like, specific seniorities. So that way you're not just reaching anybody and you can create more personalized messaging, that's even better. But unfortunately, most people don't have enough traffic. So even just getting started with all web visitors and you're creating, you're staying top of mind, I think is key. And if you don't have a lot of visitors in a way, it's a good thing because you don't have to spend as much money to stay in front of them, right? So you just have to be mindful of frequency and making sure you're not, burning these people and having them see your ad 20 times in the same session. But other than that, you should be good.
So one thing that we were talking about before we started recording was trends in 2022 and stuff that we expect to see the rest of this year and beyond. We live in a mobile world. Everybody's on their phones. There's a million stats that I'm not even going to try to make up here, but we're always on our phones. How does that impact the types of display ads that you'd be running on mobile versus desktop? I assume it does, right?
It does. It does. Like the dimensions are going to change. So that's why when you upload display creative, you're uploading multiple dimensions. I actually reviewed like $1.5 million in display data just to get some insights and learnings and share it on the podcast.
Just casually, yeah.
Casually, this is what I do on the weekends in case you're curious. So for those listening, like the top display dimensions that I recommend you do, by far the number one is 300 by 250. 728 by 90, 160 by 600, 300 by 600, 300 by 50, and then 320 by 50. Those were the top creative dimensions that I analyzed. And it's good to have multiple variations because based on the device, the dimension used will change.
$1.5 million worth of display. How did you get your hands on that?
This is like one of the fun parts of being at Metadata. I'm just behind the scenes looking at all this data.
Oh my! You're like a mad scientist in the background.
One of the things I will say for everybody listening that's so important for B2B, and this is actually a good question as well to ask to whoever's running your display, is to make sure for B2B you're not buying inventory from mobile games. For the most part, I haven't seen that fare too well in terms of display, unless you're B2C and you're trying to drive app installs, it's a very different story. But if you're a B2B advertiser, by and large, you want your your media to be getting in front of, desktop and mobile devices outside of app environments. So making sure they're only buying media on web or, web desktop or web mobile is really important. And then the other thing as well is make sure that you're only buying inventory from authorized direct or authorized resellers. So making sure you're buying inventory from publishers that have ads.txt on their website, which is basically like a little piece of code that they put to basically verify that they are real. That's also going to help you a lot in terms of getting your message in front of quality, legitimate sites, which will be reflected in a lower bounce rate, higher time on page, etc.
So, and again, asking for a friend here, aka myself, you mentioned gaming and trying to avoid that. Is that like gaming in a sense of Xbox and PS, whatever we're on, and stuff like that, or what gaming? It's been a minute since I played Call of Duty and NHL in college.
Yeah, like Call of Duty Mobile, right? If you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
that and you see ads in there, like the banner ads, it's also not just gaming, it's also
Mhm.
just like, any apps. So for
I got
example,
you.
if you have, like an alarm clock app and there's like, those little banner images on there, that's display. So just making sure you're not in those app environments, as by and large, the quality of traffic there is not as good.
Got it. I hate whenever you download an app and there's just display ads everywhere. I usually delete the app, not even kidding, just because the in-app experience is so poor, and I just don't want to have
Exactly,
to X out.
100%.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
brutal.
and people are just like clicking through that, or a lot of times too, people have kids, and the kids are playing games on their phone, and they're just, you're like, oh, this placement has a 5% CTR, I won a display,
Oh
but then
my
you notice
God.
it's like Candy Crush or something, it's like not relevant at all. So